returning to NADSAF after covering bombers on a raid to Hollandia, we encountered weather. It was almost as if a blanket had been dropped, and everything to the west was clear, and everything to the east was weather. We entered this overcast at about 12,000 to 14,000 feet, but turned back as we didn't find any holes. We went down to the deck and tried again. We were also turned back. We then went up to about 25,000 feet in an attempt to get over it, but could see that we weren't even halfway up the vertical blanket. We went back down to 12,000 to 14,000 feet and started in. I was leading a flight of 4 and almost immediately got into a spiral to my right. I straightened that out and reached up to turn on my artificial horizon. My airplane was on its first mission, and I pulled the knob of the instrument off without turning the gyro. I soon was into another spiral to the right. There was a slight green tinge to the color of the overcast day, and I made an immediate decision that if I was to get out of this, I would have to walk. So I started to gain altitude. I pulled the canopy and stood up in the cockpit. The airplane stalled out under me, and I hit the radio wires that went from the back of the cockpit to the top of each vertical stabilizer. That meant that I went between the booms and in front of the horizontal stabilizer. I was reaching for on the wrong side, trying to pull the ripcord. I stopped and looked down and grabbed the ring and pulled. The parachute opened. As I was floating down, I noticed complete silence and peacefulness. I couldn't see 10 feet in any direction, so I couldn't orient myself until I broke out of the overcast. When I did break out, I was about 400 feet from the ground, and a native garden that I saw was drifting away from me. The trees were coming up fast, so I raised my legs, and my butt formed the apex of a V, and I went through the treetops, with my chute caught in the top. I must have been about 50 feet from the ground. I bounced my harness to ensure that the chute was firmly snagged. Then I started swinging left and right until I was able to grab a large branch. I wrapped my legs around the branch and cut the chute off. When that was done, I slid down the tree to the ground. The next day, I had found a stream, and I'd always been told that if you were lost in the woods, find a stream and follow it down to the lake, ocean, whatever. I started following this stream down when I came to a waterfall about 30 feet high. As this was in a canyon with sheer cliffs on each side, and it looked as if there was a second waterfall ahead, I wanted to be sure that if I did get down, that I could get out. I knew that I could slide down a fallen tree to the right, but it didn't look too solid, and I wanted to be sure that I could get out. So I started to see if I could bypass the stream. I started around and came to a steep incline. I went down about 15 feet, and because I still couldn't see what was ahead, I found a rock about the size of a softball and threw it ahead and listened intensely. It did not strike earth for several seconds, so I knew I was at the top of a cliff, and I couldn't go that way. It took me almost an hour to climb up 15 or so feet I had gone down. I started back up the stream and found the path. So I followed it. The trail was well defined, and once I saw a wild pig about 2 or 3 feet from me. I didn't fire at it, and it didn't attack. I kept on the trail till it led to the native garden. I had a native garden that I had seen while in the parachute. It had a fence much like a snow fences that you see in the Mideast. I sat down behind the fence, got my pigeon English dictionary out of my pack and figured out what I wanted to say. When I had it down pat, I stood up and shouted at the girl. She became frightened and ran away. I knew she would tell the people in her tribe, so I spent the night in the garden. The next morning, natives were out looking for me. They were shouting, so I climbed a small tree so that I could get a better look at them. There were about 5 natives, and the leader had a military-type hat with a red band. I returned their shout, and they assured me, Japan, ego madang, Japan, ego madang, which they repeated several times. The leader also showed me a report of the last inspection report by the Angao inspector. It was about 3 years old and stated that the village was clean and that the people were loyal to Angao. The native told me to follow and took me to their village. They bathed my knee, which I'd hurt or hit the antenna wires, and they fed me some soup. It was good. The next morning, we started walking out. There were 3 natives in front of me and 2 behind me throughout the trip. However, at each tribe's boundary, we would meet a new group of natives, and 4 would go back to the old village, and 4 of the new group would continue with me. 1 native stayed with me throughout the trip. He appeared to be about 12 to 15 years old and insisted on carrying me piggyback whenever we came to any stream that had to be crossed. He also noted that I took my quinine tablets every day, so he would come to me and rub his stomach and insist I feel his forehead. He had a word that I took to mean sick. Anyway, I would give him a salt tablet, and he would have a miraculous recovery. During this trip, I entered about 5 villages, and the routine was always the same. At the boundary of the village, all the men were lined up, starting with the smallest and ending with the chief. I would shake hands with each one. I never saw a native woman, although I know they were there, for they prepared my food. On the 6th day after my bailout, we got out of the jungle and reached the coast. It was comfortable walking for the first time, for it was a well-defined trail that would go through a large group of trees and then into a patch of kunai grass. As we entered one group of trees, we had gone about 1/4 of the way through, and I heard a sharp crack. A limb of a tree that extended over the trail broke, and the largest python snake I've ever seen fell with it. The snake was on the limb, and if it hadn't shifted its weight, it would have dropped on one of us. I drew my .45 and fired several shots into the bush. I know I didn't hit anything, but the natives would not go past that spot until I passed it. I passed it, but I kept the .45 in my hand and a machete in my left. And I was really keyed up, and I continued that way into the patch of kunai grass. I came to a sharp bend in the path, and right off the path was a log that had drifted up years ago. Anyway, I thought it was another snake, and I pumped at least 5 shots into the .45 into it. I had settled down by the time I got to Land Tub and at the Angao station. There, the following things happened to me. I hit a hot bath. My clothes were washed and ironed, and I had a delicious fish dinner, courtesy of an Angao hand grenade. Also at the Angao station, my guide received his reward for bringing me out. The amount was enough for him to buy 2 wives or 1 pig. The Angao representative arranged for me to travel by barge to Sado, where I hitched a ride in the back of an A-20 to Finchhaven. I went into transport operations and could not get on the manifest for a trip to WWII because I did not have any written orders. I found a C-47 pilot who said he would take me to WWII. At the transport strip at WWII, I hitchhiked a ride by jeep to our operations office. There, I got a ride to our camp. I went to my tent, and C.J. Riemann was there. He greeted me with, "Where the hell have you been?"